Poor Waitress secretly fed a quiet girl every day. One morning, her Mafia boss father walks in. The alarm clock's shrill cry pierced through Elena's thin apartment walls at 4:30 a.m., but she was already awake. Sleep had become a luxury she couldn't afford, not when every moment of rest meant another dollar slipping through her fingers like sand. She rolled off the lumpy mattress that served as her bed, her back aching from the springs that had given up their fight months ago. The mirror in her cramped bathroom reflected a woman who looked older than her 26 years. Dark circles shadowed her brown eyes, and her once vibrant auburn hair now hung limp around her shoulders. But Elena forced a smile at her reflection, the same smile she'd wear for the next 16 hours at Murphy's diner. It was armor, that smile. Protection against a world that seemed determined to break her. Another day, another chance, she whispered to herself, repeating the mantra that had kept her going for the past 8 months. The walk to Murphy's diner took 15 minutes through the gray streets of the industrial district. Elena couldn't afford the bus fare. Every penny was already spoken for, promised to the loan sharks who circled her life like vultures. The mathematical precision of her poverty was suffocating: rent, utilities, minimum payments on the crushing medical debt, and whatever scraps remained went to keeping herself alive. Her mother's cancer treatment had cost everything. Every savings account drained, every credit line maxed, every favor called in. And when the bank said no, when insurance fell short, when traditional lenders turned their backs, Elena had made the desperate choice that haunted her every waking moment. She'd borrowed from people who didn't accept "I can't pay" as an answer. Murphy's diner squatted between a pawn shop and a laundromat like a forgotten relic from the 1950s. The neon sign flickered erratically, and the linoleum floors had seen better decades, but it was Elena's lifeline. 2 jobs, the morning shift at Murphy's and the evening shift at the factory, barely kept her afloat, but they kept her breathing. "Morning, sunshine," called Murphy from behind the grill, his Irish accent thick despite 30 years in America. He was a good man, Murphy was, even if he couldn't afford to pay much. He knew Elena's situation without her saying a word, the way she carefully rationed her own meals, the worn soles of her shoes, the haunted look that never quite left her eyes. "Morning, Murphy. Coffee's on me today." Elena tied her apron with practiced efficiency, already calculating the morning rush in her head. Truckers heading out of town, factory workers grabbing breakfast before the early shift, office workers who'd discovered Murphy's coffee was better than the fancy chains and half the price. The morning passed in a blur of orders, coffee refills, and forced cheerfulness. Elena had perfected the art of being present while her mind raced through numbers. $63 in tips from yesterday. $47 short on this month's loan payment. If she skipped lunch for the rest of the week, maybe she could stretch it. It was during the mid-morning lull that she first appeared. The girl couldn't have been more than 8 years old, pale as winter moonlight with dark hair that looked like it had been cut with professional precision. She slipped through the diner's front door like a ghost, her movements quiet and deliberate. Most children her age would have been loud, excited, running ahead of parents or caregivers. This child moved with an adult's caution. She took the corner booth, the one most adults avoided because it was too close to the kitchen's heat and noise. But it offered something the other tables didn't, a clear view of everything and everyone, with her back protected by the wall. Elena approached with her practiced smile, but something about the child made it feel more genuine. "Good morning, sweetheart. Are you waiting for someone?" The girl's eyes, dark blue, almost navy, assessed Elena with an intensity that was unsettling in someone so young. "Just me," she said simply, her voice barely above a whisper. "Well, just you need something to eat then." Elena glanced toward the door, expecting parents to arrive any moment. "What sounds good?" The girl's small hands rested flat on the table, and Elena noticed her clothes for the first time. The dress was simple but elegant, the kind of understated expensive that didn't announce itself unless you knew what to look for. The shoes, tiny designer flats that probably cost more than Elena made in a week. "I don't have money," the girl said matter-of-factly, as if this was a normal situation for an 8-year-old to navigate alone. Elena's heart did something complicated in her chest. She'd been this girl once, not wealthy, but forgotten, left to figure out the adult world with child-sized understanding. That's okay, sweetheart. How about some pancakes? Murphy makes the best pancakes in the city. She should have asked more questions. Should have called someone, found out where the girl's parents were, followed protocol. But something in those navy eyes reminded Elena of herself at that age. Proud, scared, and desperately trying to appear stronger than she felt. Murphy raised an eyebrow when Elena ordered pancakes for table 7 without payment, but he didn't question it. He'd seen Elena give away more than she could afford before. It was just who she was. The girl ate slowly, methodically, as if she was memorizing the taste. She watched Elena work, those dark eyes tracking every movement, every interaction with other customers. When Elena refilled her orange juice without being asked, the girl's carefully composed expression cracked just slightly, revealing something vulnerable underneath. "What's your name?" Elena asked during another lull, sliding into the booth across from her. "Isabella," the girl replied after a moment's hesitation. "I'm Elena. Do you live around here, Isabella?" A shake of the head. "Far away." "How did you get here?" "I walked." Elena's stomach tightened. A child, walking far distances to reach a diner where she had no money for food. Every instinct screamed that something was wrong, but Isabella seemed healthy, clean, well cared for in every way except the obvious one: she was alone. "Are your parents working?" Elena tried again. Isabella's expression shuttered closed like a door slamming. "I should go." "Wait." Elena reached across the table, not quite touching the girl's hand. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to. But if you're hungry, and you need somewhere safe to sit for a while, you can stay as long as you want." The offer hung between them like a bridge. Isabella studied Elena's face with that unnerving intensity, as if she could read intentions written in the lines around her eyes. "Why?" Isabella asked finally. "Because everyone deserves kindness," Elena said simply. "And because when I was your age, I wish someone had offered me the same thing." Isabella nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. She stayed for another hour, finishing her pancakes and orange juice while Elena worked around her. When she finally left, she paused at the door. "Thank you," she said, and for the first time, she almost smiled. Elena watched her disappear into the afternoon crowd, something cold settling in her stomach. She told herself it was concern for a lonely child, but deep down, she felt like she'd just been evaluated, and somehow, she'd passed the test she didn't know she was taking. The rest of her shift passed normally, but Elena couldn't shake the feeling that Isabella's visit had changed something fundamental. She'd always believed that kindness was its own reward, that small gestures mattered even when no one was watching. She had no idea how wrong she was about no one watching. That evening, as Elena trudged to her second job at the factory, she didn't notice the black sedan that had been parked across from Murphy's all day. She didn't see the man in the expensive suit who'd observed every moment of her interaction with the child. And she certainly didn't know that Isabella's walk to the diner had been anything but random. Elena's simple act of kindness had just set in motion a chain of events that would either save her life or destroy it completely. In her world of crushing debt and desperate choices, she'd unknowingly caught the attention of someone whose own choices were far more dangerous than anything she could imagine. The test had begun, and Elena didn't even know she was taking it. Isabella returned 3 days later, slipping through the diner's door during the same mid-morning lull like a shadow keeping an appointment with sunlight. This time, Elena was ready for her, or thought she was. "Good morning, Isabella," Elena called softly, already moving toward the corner booth with a glass of orange juice. The girl paused mid-step, and for a moment, Elena saw surprise flicker across her carefully controlled features. "You remembered?" "Of course I remembered." Elena set the juice down and pulled out her order pad, though they both knew it was just for show. "Pancakes again?" Isabella nodded and slid into the booth with that same eerie adult composure. But today, Elena noticed something different. The girl's movements were less guarded, her posture slightly more relaxed. It was a small change, barely perceptible, But Elena had learned to read people's hunger, not just for food, but for connection. "You came back," Elena said, stating the obvious while she waited for Murphy to start the pancakes. "You said I could?" Isabella's voice was still barely above a whisper, but there was something new in it, a question disguised as a statement. "I meant it. This seat is yours whenever you need it." Over the following weeks, Isabella became as regular as the morning coffee rush. She arrived every Tuesday and Thursday at exactly 10:30 a.m., ordered the same breakfast, and observed Elena with those unnervingly intelligent navy eyes. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, she began to open up. It started with small things. Isabella would comment on Elena's hair ribbon or ask why Murphy spoke with a funny accent. She never asked personal questions, never pried into Elena's life, but she listened to everything with an intensity that made Elena feel like her words mattered. "Why do you always smile?" Isabella asked one Thursday, her fork hovering over her half-finished pancakes. Elena looked up from wiping down the counter, surprised by the directness of the question. "What do you mean?" "Even when you're tired. Even when that man yelled at you yesterday because his eggs were wrong. You still smile." Elena set down her rag and really looked at Isabella. The girl had been watching, cataloging, remembering details that most adults wouldn't notice. "I suppose. Because smiling is a choice. And even when everything else is going wrong, I can still choose to be kind." Isabella absorbed this with the seriousness of a scholar studying ancient texts. "My Nana used to say that. Before she died." It was the first personal detail Isabella had ever shared, and Elena felt the weight of the trust being offered. "Your grandmother sounds like she was wise." "She was. She said kindness is rare, so you should notice it when you see it." Elena's throat tightened unexpectedly. She was right about that. As the weeks passed, Elena began to notice details about Isabella that didn't quite add up. The girl's clothes were always impeccable, not just clean, but expensive in a way that whispered rather than shouted. Her shoes were Italian leather, soft as butter. Her small handbag, which she clutched protectively, bore the subtle logo of a French designer that Elena recognized from magazines she couldn't afford. But it wasn't just the clothes. Isabella's mannerisms spoke of careful training, the way she placed her napkin in her lap before eating, how she cut her pancakes into precise squares, the fact that she never left a single crumb on her plate. This was a child who had been taught proper etiquette by someone who understood it intimately. "Your parents must have good jobs," Elena ventured one morning, trying to sound casual. Isabella's fork stopped midway to her mouth. "I don't talk about my family. Of course not. I'm sorry for prying." But Isabella surprised her by continuing. "I like coming here because you don't ask questions about them. You just see me." The simple statement hit Elena like a physical blow. How many times had she felt invisible in her own life? How many times had people looked through her rather than at her? "You're easy to see," Elena said quietly. "You're smart and thoughtful, and you notice things other people miss." Isabella's carefully composed mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something raw and vulnerable underneath. "You really think so?" "I know so." What Elena didn't know was that every word of their conversations was being reported back to someone who lived in shadows and commanded respect through fear. Isabella's visits weren't the random wanderings of a neglected child. They were reconnaissance missions, carefully orchestrated to learn everything possible about the woman who had shown unexpected kindness to Vincenzo Moretti's most precious possession. Each Tuesday and Thursday, after Isabella left the diner, she would climb into a waiting car 3 blocks away. The driver, a mountain of a man named Sal, would ask the same question. "How did it go, little princess?" And Isabella would provide a detailed report. Elena worked 2 jobs and was always tired. She gave away food she couldn't afford to give. She smiled at customers who were rude to her. She asked gentle questions but never pushed when Isabella didn't want to answer. She had kind eyes that looked sad when she thought no one was watching. "Papa will want to hear about the loan sharks," Isabella had reported after her 4th visit, when she'd overheard Elena on the phone during her break, quietly begging for more time. "You did good, Principessa," Sal would say. Your papa is proud. But Isabella was beginning to feel something she hadn't expected: guilt. Elena treated her with genuine warmth, asked nothing in return, and had no idea she was being studied like a specimen under a microscope. The woman was drowning in debt, working herself to exhaustion, and still found the energy to care about a strange child who appeared in her diner twice a week. She's different, Papa, Isabella had told Vincenzo the previous Sunday, sitting in his study while he cleaned his guns with the methodical precision he brought to everything. She's not trying to get something from me. Vincenzo had looked up from his work, studying his daughter's face with the same intensity she used to study Elena. And that's exactly why she's interesting, mia cara. Keep watching. Keep learning. But as Isabella sat in Murphy's diner, watching Elena serve coffee to truckers and comfort a crying toddler whose mother looked overwhelmed, she began to understand something her father might not have anticipated. Elena wasn't just kind because it served her purposes, she was kind because it was who she was, down to her bones. And for the first time in her young life, Isabella found herself hoping that her father's plans, whatever they were, wouldn't hurt the woman who had become the brightest part of her carefully controlled world. The irony was exquisite and dangerous. In trying to evaluate Elena, Isabella was beginning to genuinely care about her. The watcher was becoming emotionally invested in the watched, and in Vincenzo Moretti's world, emotions could be fatal. 3 miles away from Murphy's diner, in an office that commanded a view of the entire city, Vincenzo Moretti sat behind a mahogany desk that had witnessed more confessions than most churches. The room was a study in controlled power: Italian leather, Persian rugs, and walls lined with books that weren't just for show. This was a man who understood that true strength came from knowledge, and knowledge required patience. The file spread before him was surprisingly thick for someone who lived such a seemingly simple life. Elena Maria Santos, 26 years old, orphaned at 17 when her father died in a construction accident. Worked her way through community college before dropping out to care for her ailing mother. No criminal record, no outstanding warrants, no political affiliations. On paper, she was exactly what she appeared to be: ordinary. But Vincenzo had learned long ago that ordinary people could be the most dangerous of all. They were unpredictable in their predictability, capable of acts of courage or stupidity that could disrupt carefully laid plans. "Tell me again what she said about kindness," Vincenzo said without looking up from the file. Marco Terranova, his most trusted lieutenant, shifted slightly in his chair. He was used to his boss's tests, the way Vincenzo would ask the same question 3 different ways to see if the answer remained consistent. Isabella said the waitress told her that kindness is a choice, even when everything else is going wrong. That you can still choose to be kind. Vincenzo's fingers drummed once against the desk, a rare display of movement from a man who had learned to control every gesture, every expression, every breath. Interesting philosophy for someone drowning in debt to loan sharks. The sharks are getting impatient, boss. Tommy Castellano's been asking when they can collect. Tommy Castellano is a fool who thinks breaking fingers solves problems. Vincenzo finally looked up, his gray eyes holding the kind of cold intelligence that had built an empire from nothing. What has our surveillance revealed about her daily routine? Marco consulted his notes, though they both knew he had memorized every detail. Murphy's Diner, 5:30 a.m. to 2 p.m., Tuesday through Sunday. Exactly 17-minute walk to Brennan's factory, 2:45 p.m. to 11 p.m. shift. Home by 11:30. Lights out by midnight. Grocery shopping every Sunday at 6 a.m. when prices are reduced. Hasn't missed a day of work in 8 months. Friends? Relationships? None. She talks to coworkers but doesn't socialize. The factory supervisor says she keeps to herself, does her job, never complains. Murphy says the same: reliable, punctual, never causes problems. Vincenzo absorbed this information like a computer processing data. A woman with no social connections was either deeply antisocial or protecting herself from something. Given Elena's kindness toward Isabella, antisocial seemed unlikely. The mother's medical expenses? $378,000 over 18 months. Insurance covered roughly 60%. She liquidated everything: savings, retirement, sold the family house. When legitimate sources dried up, she went to Castellano's people. How much does she owe now? 47,000, with interest compounding weekly. At her current income rate, she'll never pay it off. Castellano knows this. He's waiting for her to default completely so he can leverage her into other work. The euphemism hung in the air like smoke. They both knew what other work meant in Tommy Castellano's operation. And she has no idea Isabella isn't just a random child? Marco shook his head. Our people confirm she's never made any attempts to follow Isabella, never asked other customers about her, never called child services. She treats her exactly like what she thinks she is, a neglected kid who needs a hot meal. This was what fascinated Vincenzo most. Elena Santos had encountered something that didn't make sense: a well-dressed child with expensive tastes who claimed to have no money, and instead of investigating or exploiting the situation, she simply fed the girl. It was either remarkably naive or remarkably decent. Has Isabella noticed our surveillance? If she has, she hasn't said anything. But boss, Marco hesitated, which was unusual for him. The kid's getting attached. Yesterday she asked if we could arrange for Elena to accidentally find some money. Vincenzo leaned back in his chair, a movement that somehow managed to be both relaxed and predatory. My daughter is developing feelings for this woman. Seems that way. Good. That means Elena's influence is genuine, not calculated. He closed the file with a decisive snap. Continue the surveillance. I want to know every person she speaks to, every decision she makes, every moment of doubt or strength. How long do we keep this up? Until I'm satisfied she's worthy of my daughter's trust. Vincenzo stood and moved to the window, his reflection ghost-like in the bulletproof glass. Or until I determine she's a threat that needs to be eliminated. Below him, the city sprawled like a chessboard, full of pieces that could be moved, sacrificed, or protected according to his will. But Elena Santos remained an unknown quantity, and unknown quantities made Vincenzo uncomfortable. He had built his empire on reading people, on understanding their motivations and exploiting their weaknesses. Everyone wanted something: money, power, revenge, love. Everyone could be bought, threatened, or manipulated. But Elena seemed to want nothing more than to survive with her dignity intact, and that made her either incredibly foolish or incredibly dangerous. There's something else, boss, Marco said carefully. She's been asking Isabella gentle questions. Nothing invasive, but she's clearly concerned about a child showing up alone. Define gentle. Things like, do your parents know where you are and is everything okay at home? Isabella deflects, and Elena backs off immediately. But she's watching the kid, making sure she eats, checking that she's safe. Vincenzo nodded slowly. Elena's protective instincts were genuine, another point in her favor, or another potential complication. A woman who truly cared about Isabella's welfare might not be easily dismissed or controlled if she perceived a threat to the child. Double the surveillance, he decided. I want to know what Elena Santos dreams about. Marco nodded and headed for the door, but Vincenzo's voice stopped him. And Marco? Make sure Isabella doesn't suspect anything. My daughter's happiness is worth more to me than anything else in this city. After Marco left, Vincenzo remained at the window, watching traffic flow like blood through the city's arteries. Somewhere out there, Elena Santos was serving coffee and clearing tables, unaware that her simple kindness had caught the attention of the most dangerous man in 3 states. The test was far from over, and Elena was still passing it without knowing she was being graded. But the stakes were about to rise considerably, because Vincenzo had made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow, he would visit Murphy's diner himself. The morning started like any other Tuesday, with Elena arriving at Murphy's before dawn and the familiar ritual of preparing for another day of survival. She had no way of knowing that 3 blocks away, a convoy of black vehicles was already in position, or that the most powerful man in the city had been awake since 4 a.m., choosing his clothes with the same precision a general might select weapons for battle. Isabella arrived at exactly 10:30, as she had every Tuesday for 2 months. But today, something was different. The girl's usual composed demeanor seemed fragile, like glass under pressure. Her navy eyes darted toward the door more frequently than usual, and her hands trembled slightly as she cut her pancakes into perfect squares. "You seem nervous today, sweetheart," Elena observed, refilling Isabella's orange juice. "Everything okay?" Isabella's fork paused mid-air. "Someone important is coming." "Oh? Family?" The question hung between them like a loaded gun, and Elena saw something flicker across Isabella's face: fear, anticipation, maybe both. But before the girl could answer, the diner's bell chimed, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Elena turned toward the door, and felt her blood freeze in her veins. The man who entered Murphy's diner didn't belong there any more than a wolf belonged in a petting zoo. Everything about him screamed danger: the way he moved with predatory grace, the expensive cut of his dark suit that probably cost more than Elena made in 6 months, the absolute silence that fell over the other customers like a heavy blanket. But it was his presence that truly unsettled her. This was a man accustomed to command, to being the most dangerous thing in any room he entered. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his face could have been carved from marble, and his gray eyes swept the diner with the cold assessment of someone who saw everything and forgot nothing. The truckers at the counter suddenly found their coffee cups fascinating. The elderly couple in booth 3 stopped talking mid-sentence. Even Murphy, normally jovial and loud, went quiet behind the grill. Elena's hand instinctively moved to her apron pocket, where she kept the small canister of pepper spray that had never made her feel safe but was better than nothing. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her feet seemed rooted to the linoleum floor. Then Isabella did something that shattered Elena's understanding of reality. The girl slipped out of the corner booth and ran toward the dangerous stranger, her composed mask finally falling away to reveal what she truly was: a child who had been waiting for someone she loved. "Papa!" Isabella's voice rang out clear and bright, cutting through the suffocating silence like a knife through silk. The word hit Elena like a physical blow. Papa! This man, this terrifying, powerful, obviously dangerous man, was Isabella's father. Elena watched in stunned silence as the stranger's entire demeanor transformed. The predatory coldness melted away as Isabella launched herself into his arms, and for a moment, he was simply a father embracing his daughter. His hands were gentle as he smoothed Isabella's hair, and when he spoke, his voice carried an warmth that seemed impossible given his intimidating presence. "Ciao, mia principessa," he murmured, the Italian rolling off his tongue like music. "Have you been good?" "Yes, Papa. Elena gave me extra strawberries today." At the mention of her name, those gray eyes found Elena across the diner, and she felt like a butterfly pinned to a display board. The man's gaze was surgical in its precision, taking in every detail of her appearance, her posture, her obvious terror. He set Isabella down gently, and approached Elena with the measured steps of someone who had never needed to hurry because everyone else waited for him. The other customers seemed to collectively hold their breath. "You must be Elena," he said, his voice carrying just a hint of an accent that spoke of old-world sophistication. "I am Vincenzo. Vincenzo Moretti." Elena's mouth went dry. Even she had heard whispers of that name in the darker corners of the city, spoken in the same hushed tones people use for natural disasters and terminal illnesses. "Ah, yes, I'm Elena," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincenzo slid into the booth opposite where Isabella had been sitting, moving with fluid grace that somehow made the simple action seem elegant. His presence filled the small space like smoke, and Elena found herself sitting across from him without consciously deciding to do so. "Coffee, please," he said politely, as if this were a normal customer interaction and not the most terrifying moment of Elena's life. Elena's hands shook as she poured coffee from the pot she'd grabbed from the warmer. The cup rattled against the saucer when she set it down, the small sound unnaturally loud in the continued silence of the diner. "My daughter speaks very highly of you," Vincenzo said, adding cream to his coffee with the same precision he seemed to bring to everything. "She tells me you've been kind to her. She's a lovely child," Elena replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Any parent would be proud. Something flickered behind Vincenzo's eyes, approval, perhaps, or maybe amusement at her diplomatic response. Yet you never asked where her parents were. Never questioned why an 8-year-old girl appears in your establishment alone, twice a week, claiming to have no money. The words were delivered without accusation, but Elena heard the test within them. This was a man who noticed everything, who filed away every detail for later use. I figured if she needed help, she would ask for it, Elena said carefully. Children don't usually volunteer information to strangers. Wise policy. Vincenzo took a sip of his coffee, never breaking eye contact with Elena. Tell me, what do you know about loyalty, Elena Santos? The use of her full name sent ice through Elena's veins. This man knew exactly who she was, probably knew more about her than she remembered about herself. I know it's earned, not demanded, she replied, drawing on reserves of courage she didn't know she possessed. Vincenzo smiled then, a real smile, not the predatory expression she'd expected. My daughter was right about you. You are. Interesting. Isabella had climbed back into the booth beside her father, watching the interaction with those sharp navy eyes. Elena realized the girl had been preparing for this moment, had probably known it was coming. Tell me about your debts, Vincenzo said, the words falling like stones into still water. Elena's coffee cup rattled against its saucer as she set it down, her hands betraying the terror she was trying so hard to hide. The question hung in the air like a blade, and she realized with crystalline clarity that lying to this man would be the last mistake she ever made. I owe $47,000, she said quietly, her voice barely audible above the hum of the diner's ancient air conditioning. To Tommy Castellano's people. Vincenzo's eyebrows rose slightly, not in surprise, she realized, but in acknowledgement that she'd chosen honesty over self-preservation. My daughter has been reporting your conversations to me for 2 months, Elena. I know about your mother's medical bills. I know about your 2 jobs, your 17-minute walks, your Sunday morning grocery runs when the prices are marked down. I know you haven't missed a day of work in 8 months, and I know you give away food you can't afford to give. Each revelation hit Elena like a physical blow. Isabella, sweet, lonely Isabella, had been spying on her. Every kindness, every gentle word, every moment of genuine connection had been observed, catalogued, and reported back to this terrifying man. She looked at Isabella, who sat quietly beside her father, those navy eyes now filled with something that looked suspiciously like guilt. You've been watching me. Yes, Isabella whispered, her composed mask finally cracking completely. But not the way you think. My daughter, Vincenzo interjected smoothly, has been conducting what you might call a character assessment. You see, Elena, in my line of work, trust is a currency more valuable than gold. And trust must be earned through observation, not words. What is your line of work? Elena asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Vincenzo's smile was sharp as a razor's edge. I'm a businessman who deals in, shall we say, unconventional markets. I solve problems that others cannot solve. I provide services that others cannot provide. And I protect what is mine with absolute ruthlessness. The euphemisms were elegant, but Elena understood their meaning. This man was exactly what the whispered stories claimed, someone who operated outside the law, above the law, beyond the reach of conventional justice. Why? Elena managed to ask. Why have you been watching me? Because, Vincenzo said, leaning forward slightly, my daughter has never shown interest in anyone outside our family before. She has tutors, trainers, bodyguards, all the finest money can buy. But she has never once asked to spend time with someone simply because she enjoys their company. Isabella reached across the table and touched Elena's hand with fingertips that trembled slightly. You were the first person who looked at me and saw just me. Not Papa's daughter, not a responsibility, not a target. Just Isabella. The words broke something inside Elena's chest. Despite everything, the surveillance, the deception, the danger, the connection between her and this child had been real. I need to offer you a choice, Elena. Vincenzo said, his voice taking on the formal tone of someone conducting business. You can walk away right now. Leave this diner, leave this city, and never see my daughter again. I will ensure your debts are forgiven, your safety is guaranteed, and you receive enough money to start over wherever you choose. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. Freedom. Safety. A chance to escape the crushing weight of debt that had been slowly killing her for months. It was everything she had prayed for in her darkest moments. Or, she asked, because she could see in Vincenzo's eyes that there was an alternative. Or you accept a position in my household as Isabella's companion. Not a nanny, not a tutor, but someone who can give her what money cannot buy, genuine friendship. Someone who sees her as a child, not as Vincenzo Moretti's daughter. The offer hung between them like a bridge over an abyss. Elena understood the implications immediately. Accepting meant entering Vincenzo's world, a world where trust was currency and betrayal was death, where violence was a business tool and loyalty was enforced with blood. If I stay, Elena said carefully, what happens to me? You become family, Vincenzo replied. And family in my world means protection, resources, and power. It also means that betrayal carries consequences you cannot imagine. Isabella's hand tightened on Elena's fingers. Please, she whispered. I know Papa seems scary, but he's not. He just wants to keep me safe. And I want to keep you safe too. Elena looked around the diner, at Murphy, who was pretending not to listen while cleaning the same glass for the 5th time, at the truckers who were still avoiding eye contact, at the life she'd built from scraps and determination. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Then she looked at Isabella, really looked at her. Beneath the expensive clothes and adult composure was an 8-year-old girl who had been born into a world of shadows and violence, who had probably never had a normal friendship in her life. What exactly would my responsibilities be? Elena asked. To be Isabella's friend, Vincenzo said simply. To show her kindness, to teach her that not everyone in the world wants something from her, to give her experiences that money cannot buy. In return, you will want for nothing. Your debts will disappear, your safety will be absolute, and you will have access to resources most people can only dream of. And if I want to leave someday? Vincenzo's expression grew serious. That would depend entirely on how much you learn about my business operations. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again. Elena felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her like a physical thing. Choose safety and abandon Isabella to a world of isolation and artificial relationships. Or choose the child and step into a darkness she couldn't fully comprehend. She thought about her mother, who had taught her that kindness was never wasted, even when it seemed to go unnoticed. She thought about Isabella's lonely eyes and the way the girl had lit up when Elena treated her like a normal child. I need to know one thing, Elena said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. If I stay, will I be able to live with myself? Vincenzo studied her face with that surgical intensity she was beginning to recognize. That, Elena Santos, will depend entirely on who you choose to become. Elena closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of 2 futures pressing against her consciousness. In one direction lay freedom, a chance to disappear into anonymity, to start over somewhere far from loan sharks and dangerous men who spoke in euphemisms. In the other direction lay a child who had never experienced unconditional friendship, who had been surrounded by bodyguards and tutors but never by someone who simply cared about her happiness. When Elena opened her eyes, she found Isabella watching her with an expression that was heartbreakingly adult, the look of someone who had learned not to hope too hard because disappointment was a luxury she couldn't afford. I choose Isabella, Elena said quietly, the words falling into the diner's silence like stones into deep water. The transformation on Isabella's face was immediate and radiant. The careful composure cracked completely, revealing the 8-year-old child underneath, and she launched herself across the table to wrap her arms around Elena's neck. Really? You really want to stay with me? Elena hugged the girl back, breathing in the scent of expensive shampoo and something indefinably innocent. Really. Though I have a feeling my life is about to become very different. Vincenzo watched this exchange with an expression Elena couldn't quite read, satisfaction, perhaps, or maybe relief. Different is an understatement, he said, pulling out his phone and sending a quick text. Marco will handle the transition. Your debts will be resolved by this afternoon. Your personal belongings will be moved to the estate by evening. Just like that? Elena, Vincenzo said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. You have just agreed to become part of an organization that controls significant portions of this city's commerce. When I say something will be done, it is not a suggestion, it is a statement of fact. The reality of what she'd committed to began settling over Elena like a heavy cloak. She was no longer Elena Santos, struggling waitress with crushing debt. She was about to become something else entirely. But what, exactly? There are rules in my world, Vincenzo continued, as if reading her thoughts. Rules that exist to protect both you and my family. You will learn them gradually, but understand this from the beginning. Discretion is not optional, loyalty is not negotiable, and betrayal is not survivable. Elena nodded, her throat dry. And my job here? Consider your employment at Murphy's Diner terminated as of this moment. Vincenzo stood and placed several $100 bills on the table, more money than Elena made in 2 weeks. Murphy understands the situation. Elena looked toward the grill, where Murphy was studiously avoiding eye contact while flipping pancakes with unnecessary vigor. She realized that everyone in the diner understood exactly what had just transpired, and no one would ever speak of it. Come on, Isabella said, tugging on Elena's hand. I want to show you my room, and the library, and the garden where Nana used to grow roses. As they prepared to leave, Vincenzo placed a hand on Elena's shoulder, a gesture that could have been paternal or threatening, depending on interpretation. One more thing, Elena. In accepting this position, you have earned my protection, but you have also accepted my authority. I am not a cruel man, but I am an absolute one. As long as you remember that Isabella's safety and happiness are my primary concerns, we will have no problems. Elena met his gray eyes steadily. And if something happens to you? What becomes of Isabella then? The question clearly surprised him. Not many people dared to contemplate Vincenzo Moretti's mortality to his face. But after a moment, he smiled with what might have been genuine respect. Then you will have already proven yourself worthy of the responsibility I'm placing in your hands. As they walked toward the diner's exit, Elena caught sight of her reflection in the window. She looked the same auburn hair, same tired eyes, same worn uniform. But something fundamental had shifted. She was no longer a woman drowning in circumstances beyond her control. She had chosen her path, dangerous as it was. Elena? Isabella asked as they stepped into the morning sunlight, where a black sedan waited with engines running. Are you scared? Elena considered the question honestly. Terrified, she admitted. But sometimes the right choice is the scary one. Isabella squeezed her hand as they approached the car. Papa says that courage isn't about not being afraid, it's about doing the right thing even when you are afraid. Your father is a wise man. He's also very dangerous, Isabella said matter-of-factly. But he won't hurt you as long as you don't hurt me. And you won't hurt me, will you? Never, Elena promised, meaning it with every fiber of her being. As the sedan pulled away from Murphy's Diner, Elena watched her old life disappear in the rearview mirror. She had no idea what awaited her in Vincenzo Moretti's world, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She had made the only choice her heart would allow. Welcome to the family, Elena, Vincenzo said from the front seat, his voice carrying both warmth and warning. Kindness is a strength, but in my world it can also get you killed. Remember that. Elena nodded, understanding that her real education was just beginning. She had entered a world of shadows and power, where loyalty was currency and trust was earned in blood. But beside her sat a little girl who had never known unconditional love, and for Isabella's sake, Elena would learn to navigate whatever darkness lay ahead. The poor waitress was gone. In her place sat someone who would need to be stronger, smarter, and more dangerous than she had ever imagined possible. The transformation had begun.